lucky enough to have Emily Jones. Emily Jones is a professor at Queens College with the City University of New York, and her lab actually focuses on social communication in autism, and also she works with Down syndrome. And Emily Jones has been one of the few people who have designed rigorous studies for understanding the efficacy of sibling support groups.
All right, I'm actually really excited to talk to you guys about our program for children with autism and their families, and some of the research that we've been doing. I've actually had a lot of fun over the last couple of weeks watching all the webinars you guys have done that are posted. They've been actually really fascinating to listen to. So I hope this one has the same effect on everybody else who's listening. All right, there is a wealth of literature that describes the impact of having a child with autism on parents, on families, and a growing literature is focused on the typically developing siblings. While parents often receive some kind of support, whether it's a support group or it's some kind of training or counseling, there are far fewer resources for siblings. And so that's one of the reasons that my colleagues and I started Sibs Club, which is a program for children with autism and their families. This began as a collaboration with a colleague of mine, Dr. Kathleen Feely, and since 2014, I have run the program at Queens College with a colleague of mine, Dr. Dan Feenup, who's now actually at Teachers College. He's no longer at Queens with me. We follow the school calendar. The program runs every fall and spring semester for 10 weeks. The kids come in for a couple of hours on a Saturday or Sunday morning for the support group. And the reason for it running with the fall and spring semesters, et cetera, is because the program is entirely run by students. So in addition to the services we provide for the families, we have undergraduate and graduate practicum experiential learning courses where the students, essentially we're teaching the next generation of therapists and educators in the field. And our students do go on in a variety of fields, many of them into therapy or education, but across the board, a variety of helping professions. Sibs Club is also engaged in research to try to make sure that what we're doing in the program is evidence-based and that we are sharing that with the wider community. So our research is primarily focused on the siblings. We have done a couple of other things, but most of it focuses on the siblings. Although the descriptive literature about the needs for typically developing siblings who have a sibling with autism is rather mixed, a recent meta-analysis from Shivers et al. Does suggest that there are some areas of difficulty for typically developing siblings. Of note are internalizing difficulties, so things like anxiety and depression, as well as differences in the quality of the sibling relationship. I think it's really important to point out two things about the nature of that literature. One is that when I say there are differences, I'm using that word very carefully because when we look at these measures, kids are not necessarily scoring in a range that suggests there's real clinically significant need. Might be elevated, but not necessarily a diagnosis, a need for diagnosis of something. I think the other thing to point out is that the literature is a little bit skewed in that there are some studies that actually do suggest positive outcomes in terms of things like empathy and social development, but that literature is much smaller in comparison to what to other effects. So it's certainly a need in the literature to continue to explore those more positive outcomes. So recognizing the potential difficulties for siblings and really the lack of options that seem to be out there for siblings, we started a support group. And support groups are common for parents of children with autism and other disabilities, so it made sense to perhaps start there as a way of supporting siblings. We run the support group very much like a support group you would run for adults or parents, except that we actually do have adult leaders in the room. We don't let the children lead the group. So they follow a manualized curriculum. So it looks very similar to what you probably think of. These are some of the materials the kids use. It's certainly not everything, but the kids get a workbook at the beginning of the group. It has all the materials they need to follow along with all the activities of the group. The first few weeks of the group, we play a Starburst candy game. It's always one of the hot commodities. When we're in person, everybody goes down the hallway to the support group room to get a stash of Starbursts. The first couple of weeks are really about getting to know everybody and starting to develop that really important support and peer network. So you draw a candy from the bag, and if it's red, you share something. If it's orange, you share something else. So the first couple of weeks, it's just sharing like my favorite book, my favorite movie, things like that. And then you can see the one that's listed here is starting to share things about your family that you like or don't like, fun things you do with your family, and then talking specifically about your siblings. Children also, you can see the tree and the leaves that the group made one semester. They talk about positive and negatives in their sibling relationship, kind of share them as a group. They discuss coping strategies. You can see the list that was made one semester down here of coping strategies that the kids came up with. They learn about autism through lots of group discussions, but also through reading books. The books vary every group because it depends on the age, needs, the books the kids have already been exposed to in the group. So we do vary it quite a lot. We also have a guest speaker come in every semester to talk, who is an older adolescent or adult who has a sibling with autism, and they talk about their experiences growing up. As a result of all of those discussions and interactions, the group actually creates a definition of autism that is their definition of autism, one that works for the children in the group and their life experiences of autism. So that's our group. And we have started to examine the effects of a sibling support group. There are a couple of things to note with respect to researching sibling support groups. One is that there is actually a literature examining support groups for siblings. That literature, though, tends to include a very heterogeneous group. So it's siblings who have a sibling with cancer, learning disability, physical disabilities, autism, and every single study indicates that the groups should be much more homogeneous. So we should have a group of siblings who have a sibling with autism, or we should sort of carve that up in some more homogeneous way. So our support group just includes siblings who have a sibling with autism. There may be co-occurring conditions, but autism is a primary diagnosis. So with that said, there are actually a handful or so of studies examining support groups for just siblings who have a sibling with autism. As Alicia indicated, the next issue in this research area is the lack of rigorous experimental designs to evaluate the effects of those support groups. So most of the studies are pre-post designs. You don't have a comparison group. You don't know if the changes that were made or that occurred were any more or greater than would have just occurred over the passage of time, or in comparison to just some fun group activities amongst a bunch of children. So, okay. So what did we find? No, I have to tell you about the study first. I can't jump into what we found. So we're excited because the study that I'm reporting on is the first randomized control trial of a support group for siblings. So we randomly assigned 54 siblings to either the support group or an attention-only control condition. And what that just means is that the kids who were in the attention-only control condition pretty much engaged in the same activities, like they played that candy game, but they didn't talk about autism, their feelings about their brothers or sisters or their families in particular. So they kind of had the same exposure to a group, to attention, but not with the same emphasis on coping strategies, feelings, et cetera, and learning about autism. So if we come up with any differences, we should be able to attribute them to the content of the support group and not those other variables like attention. So the children included in the study ranged in age from about 5 or 6 to about 11 or 12 years of age, average of about 8 years. They come from a very, very diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds that reflect where I am in Queens. So, which is a nice other piece of this literature. Consistent with most of the literature, our kids are not scoring in the clinically significant range. Again, they may be elevated, but they're not scoring in the clinically significant range. And I think that's just important to point out about the kinds of needs we're addressing with a support group. Our measures, so in terms of looking at the outcomes of the support group, the siblings themselves and their parents both completed measures about their adjustment, psychological functioning, and the quality of their sibling relationship. We also video recorded the siblings playing together, playing games, just checkers, Connect Four, other board games, those kinds of things. And we actually then went back and coded those videos for a number of variables, like the play the kids were engaging in, their social communicative behavior, and affect. Okay, now I can tell you what we found. That's the fun part. So one study has been published. You can see the references down here, that has to do with outcomes for the typically developing siblings themselves. And those siblings who participated in the support group showed improvements in their self-reported coping skills, and decreases in their parent-reported externalizing behavior. So things like acting out, attention difficulties, hyperactivity, that sort of thing. We also found a buffering effect. And again, this is consistent with the descriptive literature that says, that suggests that severity of challenging behavior and symptomatology in the sibling with autism may impact typical sibling adjustment. So we did also find a buffering effect against increases in anxiety and depression when the sibling with autism shows more severe symptomatology. So essentially what's happening is the support group, those in the support group aren't necessarily changing in their self-reported anxiety or depression, but those in the control group who have a sibling with more severe symptomatology are showing increases in that symptomatology. So there's something going on with the support group that's at least buffering against those kinds of negative changes over time. So, and here I'm giving you kind of a sneak peek. We're literally about to submit these for publication. And so in addition to examining the typically developing sibling, we wanted to look at the quality of the sibling relationship. That's a really important one, which makes me really happy for seeing what you guys are doing and being able to listen to your experiences. But it is in a really critical relationship. It's critical for all children and their siblings, but it is certainly critical when you have a sibling with a disability. And so these, again, these are highlights of something not published yet. It's just kind of fun. We found improvements in the typically developing siblings self-report about the quality of their sibling relationship. So they're reporting more positive relationships. They're reporting having more connection to their sibling with autism, etc. In addition to that, remember I said we did those video recordings of the siblings playing together, and that's where a lot of the rest of our information about the sibling relationship comes from. We found increases in the typically developing sibling initiating interaction. And again, those are increases for the kids who participated in the support group and not that are greater than those who participated in the control condition. Again, similar to some of what we found in the study looking at the typical sibling outcomes, we found a protection or buffering effect with respect to positive affect. So there was a decrease in positive affect for siblings in the control group and not so much for the with respect to, sorry, I said that incorrectly. I was doing play in my head. It was protecting against decreases in positive affect when the sibling with autism was showing more severe symptomatology and externalizing behavior. We also found changes in play, but mostly what's happening is the support group siblings are not necessarily changing their level of play, but the control group siblings are showing decreases in their play interaction. So essentially their play is getting less interactive over time. Rather than staying or getting more interactive over time. One of the other things that's important to note is that we did also look at negative affect in their interactions, and we saw no changes in negative affect, so no increase in negative affect, suggesting that there's nothing that's going on in the support groups that might be perceived as problematic on the part of the siblings, which I think is a really good thing. So what we've got here is, to me, really exciting. We've got a support group just for siblings of individuals with autism that improved outcomes, not just for the typical sibling, but also for the quality of their relationship. That is pretty important for everyone lifelong. Just because we started a little late, I just want to check, do you want me to keep going? Because I have two more little things, probably 10 minutes that I can talk about, but I can stop there also.
Keep
Or
going.
keep going? Okay,
Going.
Yeah,
I'm gonna keep going.
please keep
All right.
going. We'll field all the questions towards the end as well, because you're
Okay.
giving us plenty of material to work with.
Okay, good. All right. So as we ran the support group and we've been working on this study, we've also started looking at other approaches to support siblings and their families. One of the things that we started observing and wondering about was if some of the siblings needed more um, specific strategies, specific ways, more specific instruction in how to engage with their sibling with autism. And that's not necessarily true across the board. There are some siblings, especially when we do those observations, where we see them, they're just kind of natural, having fun. But some siblings are really struggling for ways to engage with their sibling with autism. And so we took a really different approach, or we have started to take a really different approach and look at a sibling training where we essentially identify very specific strategies that we can teach the typically developing sibling that will facilitate interactions and play with their sibling with autism. And these are all individualized. So unlike the support group, that's a very general, across a group kinds of discussions, this is very specific to an individual sibling dyad. So we observe and try to figure out, like, would sharing a toy be the best thing to do? Would just talking to their sibling be the best thing to do? Can they help their sibling take a turn during the game so that they can maintain that back and forth and interaction? We take a typical behavioral skills training approach, which means we first, with the sibling and us, we tell them what strategy we want them to use. We model it. We practice through with them. Lots of praise and reinforcement for doing so. Lots of feedback as necessary. And once they're doing well there, we practice with their sibling with autism. Again, we're still providing a great deal of support, lots of assistance to do something new that for some kids might, they might feel a little funny doing, but becomes natural, more natural over time. And then, of course, we want to fade out our supports so that it's not us there that's impacting what they're doing, but instead they're likely to go home, not sit at Queens College, go home, go in their community and engage in the same kinds of strategies to interact with their sibling. The last way we also try to support that is to teach the siblings. I'm still coughing. So teach the siblings how to self-monitor. And what that means is that they just keep track of the strategies they're using to engage their sibling. And again, if they can do that, then we don't need to do it. And so it's in their hands, and it's more likely to happen at home and in the community. So what we were doing there is, once we wrapped up that study comparing the support group to that control condition, we started comparing the support group to sibling training. Essentially, seeing, are there differential effects of these two approaches to intervention? And ultimately, questions do need to center on things like, are there differential effects, but are there different kids for whom we need to be thinking about these different approaches? Those data, that study's ongoing. Well, it's kind of stopped right now. We stopped obviously in March of last year, and we will resume at some point. But in the meantime, we've been able to look at just the individual sibling training data through our single subject designs. Experimental design. So what you see here on the left is Sophie's learning of 3 of the strategies that we taught. So we taught her to pair or share a toy. We taught her to talk to her sibling, and we then taught the self-management. And not to get too technical, but I'm happy to at some point. If you look on the left, you see that during baseline, before we started teaching, Sophie was not engaging in any of these strategies to facilitate play with her sibling. Once we started teaching, you can see that she increased engaging in all those strategies. If you're wondering about this dip here, it happens every single time. What we did is we taught this pairing, right? And then we taught commenting. And when we started teaching commenting, she stopped pairing. And as soon as we reminded her to pair again, everything went back up and everybody was fine. So that's just a little snippet of what we've been doing with respect to sibling training and kind of this new study. I'm really excited to see what these differential effects might be in comparing the support group to the training itself. All right, one more little thing. So just like with sibling, or just like with the support group where we were observing the potential need for something else for some of our siblings, we started also observing the potential need for certain families, and parents were regardless of what might be changing for their sibling interactions, parents were continuing to report difficulties with their children. And again, not necessarily autism, dealing with autism, but trying to get their kids to play together, to interact together, to be successful together, the way that all parents try to do for their siblings. Now, what's interesting is now having looked at the relationship outcome data for the support group study, what we found is that the typical siblings reported that their relationships changed. Parents didn't. Parents did not report that the quality of their children's relationship changed. So something's different there from the parent perspective, which I think is really interesting, and not anything we wouldn't kind of expect. There are definitely data for that, but just interesting observation and thinking about what do we need to be doing differently. And again, there are lots of explanations for that, but from my perspective, thinking about supports, I immediately go to, well, what do we need to change about the way we're supporting families if parents are still expressing concern. So we essentially took that sibling training that I just described, but instead of teaching the sibling, we taught the parents to do the same thing with both of their children present. So you can see this dad is facilitating an interaction between his two children. And again, what we taught him is exactly the same thing we were doing. We just taught him to do it with both of his kids during a play interaction. Oops, I think that slide was done. Oh no, I went backwards. Okay. This was again a single subject design study. So you can see these two really long and convoluted graphs, and I get it. On the left, you see parent data. So what we did is we had 3 parents. So each of these 2 graphs refers to 1 parent. We taught each parent 2 essentially skills to teach their children during play. And it was the same kind of skills, turn taking, helping, sharing, etc. So parents are just learning to prompt and reinforce those skills. And then on the right here, you see the data for the typically developing child who learned those skills. And again, if you look on the left of each of the graphs, you can see the parents are not engaging in prompting and reinforcing those skills. Siblings are by and large not engaging, except for a couple. And once we introduce intervention, they're starting to engage in all of those behaviors. Okay. So in addition, or, you know, as we continue to think about sort of supporting the whole family and taking what I'm starting to talk about is a little bit more of a family systems approach to some of the work that we do. We are continuing to think about for which siblings, which intervention, maybe which combination of interventions is most appropriate. Looking at family characteristics, sibling characteristics that might mean one support group might be the most effective at this particular point in time versus sibling training might be more effective. And lastly, you can see on the bottom something I never thought I'd do, but I have been thrown into. Obviously, we are not collecting in-person data, so the study that I was describing comparing support group to training is stopped at the moment. I'm hoping we're starting in the fall again. But in the meantime, we moved our support group to a telehealth model, and we ran it in the fall with success. We're running it now again, which is really exciting. And I'll just leave you with a little funny here. So one of the things our group does on the first couple of 2 weeks of meeting is come up with their own group name. And the group last fall named themselves the Super Nuggeteers. So they have a Sibs Club Super Nuggeteer mascot and t-shirts that they all got. So. And I will stop there and hand it over to you guys and take a drink of water so I don't choke.